Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two marvelous poets with us today, Laure-Anne Bosselaar and Bart Edelman. Laure-Anne will read first and then Bart. Laure-Anne Bosselaar is the author of The Hour Between Dog and Wolf, Small Gods of Grief, winner of the Isabella Gardner Prize for Poetry in 2001. A New Hunger and ALA notable book, and These Many Rooms. Her poetry was featured on the Academy of American Poets, Poem a Day, and in many reviews such as Orion, Georgia Review, and Harvard Review. Garrison Keillor read her poems on NPR's A Writer's Almanac. A Pushcart Prize recipient and the editor of 5 anthologies, she taught at Sarah Lawrence College and UCSB and lives in Santa Barbara. Here's a splendid poet, Laure-Anne Bosselaar.
Well, thank you, Harry. Thank you very much, Bart. And also thank you to the MPTF Studios and the Creative Chaos team. That's exactly what my first 5 versions of every poem I write, that's it. It's creative chaos. So I think it's a wonderful expression. It's beautiful. And I'm delighted to read with you, Bart. Really delighted. Is that your real background there? Because it's beautiful.
You talking about me or Bart?
That would be a no.
Bart, that would be a no. Okay, yes. Because I would love to have that as a... Anyway, I want to tell you a funny story, Bart. About, I don't know, many years ago, I have always loved canaries, and I bought a new canary. And my intention was to call my canary Juanita Miranda Montana because of one of your poems. And I love that word, you know. I mean, Juanita Miranda Montana, for a little canary. I thought that was a wonderful way to call the canary. And then my husband, the late poet Kurt Brown, said, honey, all canaries that sing are male. Females don't sing. And so he messed up my complete, amazement of your poem. So I never called a canary after one of your poems. I'm sorry, Bart.
Thank you so much, Laurie. That's so sweet. What a sweet way to begin this program.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to start my reading by, I'm a widow and I live alone. And as you know, that many people who lived alone during the pandemic, it was a problem sometimes. It was pretty lonely, you know, for months and months. And so I wrote a few poems about that. And the first one is called Tonight's Dinner Companions. I'm going to have a sip of water. Tonight's Dinner Companions. As the stew simmers on the stove, I set a place at the table for you. Thin and dog-eared book, I never tired of dog-earing again. And you, June breeze coming in to flutter its pages too. And you, a photo of a Flemish farmer in the rain, proudly brandishing 7 dead muskrats. And you, memory of a Brussels attic, my hand over my first lover's hand, weighing on my heart. And you, salt shaker I stole from a Paris hostel near the barricades of May of 1968. And you, old poet, gone, whose lines I often say aloud against the ocean's constant hush. And you, my love's baseball cap, the one he kept losing and is now on a shelf, never to be lost again. And you, reader, to whom I've been reading most of my life, this place is for you. And then here's another poem about a dinner, and that's a dinner I really did not like very much in New York a long time ago. And I'm so glad I'm now on the West Coast where this wouldn't happen. This dinner is called Dinner at the Who's Who. Amidst swirling wine and flickers of silver, guests quote Dante, Brecht, Kant, and one another. I wait in the hall after not powdering my nose, trying to recompose the woman who will graciously take her place at the table and will not tell her hosts, I looked into your bedroom and closets. I smelled your obsession and brute. I sat on your bed. I imagined you in those spotless sheets, looked long into the sad eyes of your son staring at your walls from his velvet frame. I tried to smile at myself in your mirrors, wondering if you smile that way too. Those resilient little smiles one smiles at oneself before facing the day or another long night ahead, guests coming for dinner. So I wait in this hall because there are nights it's hard not to blurt out, stop! Stop your babble. Pulitzer, Wall Street, sex, Dante, politics, wars, have some Chianti. Let's stop and talk of our thirsts and obsessions, our bedrooms and closets, the brutes in our mirrors, the eyes of our sons. There's time yet. Let's talk. I am starving. You know, in French, everything has a gender. And a quick parenthesis, I'm Belgian. So my first mother tongue was French. My second mother tongue was Flemish. And I always had problems in English where there is no gender. Everything has a gender in French. Like in Spanish, actually, la muerte is the death and is feminine. So I wrote a poem in which death is feminine like it is in French. A late afternoon stroll on the cliffs. As usual, death sweetly slips her arm in mine, and we take a deep breath from the eucalyptus breeze. We both worked honestly at our jobs. All day, death destroyed traffic with wailing ambulances, while I killed hours and lines on 8.5 by 11-inch pages. We're fast friends by now. Death, much older, of course, but there's no hierarchy between us. We're both taking a break from it all. Glad to watch waves collapse on rocks and pelicans dive bomb fish. I try to be sensitive to death's guilt, that whole pandemic disaster she can no longer control. And she'll soon betray me too, like she will you, I know. But today the gulls are silver angels etching great cursive's blessing in a perfect sky. So death and I make believe we believe that and amble on. I live actually 7 minutes by car, sometimes 6, sometimes 8, depending on traffic. And I love to walk on the beach or on the cliffs above, on the bluffs above the Pacific. And this is a little pantoum about walking on a beach that I call Godwit Beach, because there are lots of little Godwits there. Godwit Beach. How appeased they are today, those waves, limpid, crowning shoulder to shoulder, old lovers coming to linger on these sands, companions of furious storms and Pacific languor, limpid, crowding shoulder to shoulder like us, love. They reminded me of us, those tides, companions of furious storms and Pacific languor. We walked a while along these limestone cliffs. Like us, love. They remind me of us, those tides. Remember? It was late in the afternoon. We walked a while along these limestone cliffs under the silver ghosts of eucalyptus trees. Remember? It was late in the afternoon. We said, yes, yes, this is where we belong, isn't it? Under the silver ghosts of eucalyptus trees as the day blushes so frankly there way in the west. We said, yes, yes, this is where we belong, isn't it? Old lovers come to linger on these sands as the day blushes so frankly there, way in the west. How appeased they are, those waves today. I love the form of the pantoum. It's a beautiful discipline, and you have to find ways to make it flow and not sound boringly repetitive. So this is one of my favorite forms. Storms sometime to read it. This poem is called Dawn Garden. I have a tiny garden, I live in a bungalow, and that bungalow is protected by this huge jacaranda tree that is older than me. I discovered when my bungalow was built, and it was built 3-4 years before I was born. So it's 70, I'm 70. No, I'm 79. So the tree is probably 80 or 81 or 82. I love this tree and my little garden under that tree. It's not bigger than the big jacaranda and the shadows it throws in my garden. This is called Dawn Garden. Because everything I learned from the stained glass windows I knelt under still remains thorned and stained and torn. And all the teachings I was expected to believe still leave me disbelieving. And I wish this were not so. And because a sparrow's first chirp can pour gratitude into me like drought dazzling rains, and I'd much rather kneel for that. And I do. There's something appeased in the way I get up again and brush the dirt from my knees, that humble dirt that belongs to no one and is mine so entirely in this small lot, hedged and hidden with its offerings of fruit and shade and song. So that later, when night brooms hallow all I praised, I'll return to the night garden to be blessed that way too. Here is a complaint, and I need to tell you that phallus impudicus is the Latin known for a colloquially common name in English, which is the stinkhorn. It's a widespread fungus in the Fallaceae family. Fallaceae family. Fallaceae. I mean, I'm going to write a poem that's called Fallaceae family. That's for later. Okay. Complaint about missing friends after 10 months of the pandemic. No one is near to see or hear me but the dog, who sighs when I say serious things, and I'm dead serious when I tell her how her gray muzzle is softer than Samarkand silk. No one here to tell. I just read that on hot summer nights, Verlaine threw pail after cold water pail on the gravel under Rimbaud's windows to cool the air as he slept. And no one to sidestep with me to some silly tune as the dog tail wags out of rhythm, or listen to my Flemish song about spring coming soon and the Phallus impudicus being almost in bloom. To see me kneel by the rosemary, breathing in its oily green, before night will come flitting into the yard and the skunks and raccoons join in to feast on such fresh darkness. No friends to be here with me, and all this, and wave fondly as they would leave the rosemary, the dog, the evening, and me, but leaving behind that lilt in their voices. Good night, good night. I missed friends so much and I missed cooking for them, and sitting there with our elbow at the tables and talking and talking and talking. This poem is about, actually, this poem is against many of my friends who keep complaining about being old. And I'm perfectly happy being old. I love being old. I like being old. And well, okay, my knee hurts. And other things, but anyway, this is a poem about that. A word for it. I'm at the bare end of the bluff, blue sweater sleeves pulled over my hands, the jays and waves, the only sounds. Miles away, barely visible, suspended in a shamble of chiffon mist, Anacapa Island is almost transparent. I lean against a parched eucalyptus at this Pacific edge, feeling gladly old in this young morning. Is there a word for this? Breathful. That's it. I feel breathfully old. The marine layer frays in the east and shivers through the air. Then, coming from nowhere, a wind flaw whirls silver scarves into the waves and wraps the young sun inside them. This doesn't last longer than my gasp, no longer than for me to turn around, hoping for someone, anyone, to be standing here too and to say, "Wasn't that beautiful?" And this poem is going to speak to you about my parentage, where I come from. I don't think I need to say much more. Parentage. Mine is not from the morass of Flanders marshes, although their hues ink my eyes. Not from a mother, her head spun always away. Nor from convent walls or kisses that I hid, head bowed inside my childhood palms to quiet longing, such longing. But from a Flemish farmer once, who held my face in both hands to kiss my brow for no more than a second. It was that brief, but with such will and tenderness that I can now lift my head way back to read the clouds. I'm from the ocean's melancholy, dragging its anchors back and forth, never quiet, never still, waves so restless they can't mirror the moon. I'm from those tides, those ebbings, and from 2 wedding bands on my finger, from them too, and from every book I ever held, my shelved provenance, language womb, and sail. 2 oceans, I have that Pacific Ocean on one side and the North Sea on the side of my provenance in youth. And this is my last poem, and I dedicated it to my readers. And actually, I'm dedicated now today to you, Bart, and you, Harry, and anyone who's listening. Lately, when a branch pulls at my sleeve like a child's tug, or the fog, reticent and thick, lifts, and strands of it still hang like spun sugar between branches and twigs. Or when a phoebe trills from the hackberry, I believe such luck is meant only for me. Does this happen to you? Do you believe at times that a moment chooses you to remember it entirely and tell about it so that it may live again? Thank you.
Thank you very much for a wonderful reading. You have so much vitality, joy, and understanding, and a sense of living in the here and now. That's very refreshing. So thank you. I have a couple of questions for you. When did you write your first poem?
I was 9, 8 or 9, and it was in a convent. My parents put me in a convent when I was 3.5 years old, and I stayed there until I was 17 and ran away, literally. And I've been happy ever since, by the way. And so we were not allowed to write. We were only allowed to copy prayers or read prayers or read the missal or, And so my first poem was actually stick figures that I would write and have the stick figures do things that I wanted to remember or wanted to talk about. And I called them my stick figure poems. And then one day I was 12 or 13, I heard that the song, the hymns that were sung in church rhymed. I had never heard that. I realized that. It was kind of a miracle that there was music inside the hymns. The rhymes made music and the hymns made music, right? And then I started writing madly. Everything rhymed. Everything. So,
your last poem, you talked to the reader, and I noticed that in all your poetry, you really have a nice connection with your reader. And the question has nothing to do with that. That was just an observation. But what is it about the poetry form that attracts you to it?
I've tried so hard to write prose. I've tried so hard to go with my lines all the way to the right margin, and I just can't do it. The form, the shortness, what is it? The concision and the discipline of having to say everything in 3/4 of a page, or sometimes a page and 4 lines. That is where I feel the best. When they ask me to write a book review or something like that, I literally suffer. I suffer. It's so hard to go all the way, and all these semicolons and it just goes on and on. That's my answer.
You certainly have a lot of liveliness in the poetry. I'm glad you write poetry. And there's also compression. You put so much into a poem, but it's always so, I don't know what the word is. It's just so lively and in the here and now. I like that. Even though you may be dealing with a memory, you make it all happen right here while you're reading, and obviously as the way you wrote it. We have just a minute or two before I introduce Bart. Bart, you're a teacher. Would you like to say anything to Laure-Anne before I introduce you?
Oh, I just, what a beautiful reading, Laure-Anne. And
Well, thank you, Bart. Thank you.
I enjoyed it immensely.
Good.
And thank you so much for saying a few words about my poem in the beginning.
Yes.
That's a new poem. I'm interested. You found that pretty well, considering.
Yeah. Except I could never call my canary that, which was very frustrating. But maybe you could write a poem about a male name that's beautiful, because then the next canary I buy, I'll call it, maybe Mirando, Montano. I don't know.
Harry, I have to write that poem right now. So I'm just going to have to get out of here without doing the reading, I guess.
I hope you can wait for a half hour.
You bet.
And I'm delighted to listen to you now, Bart, because I love your work.
Let it simmer and it'll erupt of its own volition. Our next poet is Bart Edelman. Bart Edelman's poetry collections include Crossing the Hackensack, Prometheus Press, Under Damaris's Dress, Lightning Publications, The Alphabet of Love, The Gentleman, The Last Mojito, The Geographer's Wife, all from Red Hen, and Whistling to Trick the Wind, Meadowlark Press. He has taught at Glendale College, where he edited Eclipse, a literary journal, and most recently in the MFA program at Antioch University, Los Angeles. His work has been widely anthologized in textbooks published by City Lights Books, Etruscan Press, Fountainhead Press, Harcourt Brace, Longman, McGraw-Hill, Prentice Hall, Simon & Schuster, Thomas Heinley, the University of Iowa Press, Wadsworth, and others. He lives in Pasadena, California. Here's a superb poet, Bart Edelman.
Thank you so much, Harry. I do live in Pasadena, but I am currently in Orient, New York, on the tip of the northern fork of Long Island. So I really look forward to this reading. I'm going to read poems from earlier books and then make my way through to the recent book, Whistling to Trick the Wind, from Meadowlark Press. The first poem I'm going to read is a poem which is the title from my second book, Under Damaris's Dress. We all get education. We all receive an education from different aspects, from academia, from music, from movies. Sometimes it's a little more personal. This is Under Damaris's Dress. Under Damaris's dress, I crept that cold night to watch the crackling firelight burn between her legs. White winter snow dropped flakes against the window pane, and inside I remained to cross the orange lake. My trembling hands she covered, my wild eyes she closed. With only words that she would know, she taught me how to love her. We lay so near, the fear so far, I felt my life unfold. On silken sheets, intense of gold, I caught a falling star. Her gentle touch, her soft caress, from these I must confess, I learned the art of tenderness under Damaris's dress. This next poem is from a book called The Alphabet of Love. And I wanted to read it today, especially for Harry and for the group that is part of Harry's program. The poem is called Day of the Locust. It is about Nathaniel West, who wrote great books, Miss Lonely Hearts, Dream Life of Balso Snell, A Cool Million, and Day of the Locust. West actually was S.J. Perlman's brother-in-law. He had married Eileen. They were married a very short time before they both perished in a terrible car accident after a hunting trip when they were on their way back to Los Angeles, actually the day after a good friend of theirs, F. Scott Fitzgerald, died. His book is A Day of the Locust. Again, this is Day of the Locust. And a locust is a set of points employed to satisfy a certain equation of coordinates. This is Day of the Locust. Amid the discarded shards of hope, the twinkling glass shattered the roadway that cradled Route 111 and Route 80 in the palm of a giant, unforgiving hand, which finally closed midway between Calexico and El Centro. There wasn't even a moment for them to say goodbye. Eileen's watch stopped at 2:55 on December 22nd, 1940, as she lay twisted in a ditch while Nat toiled with his last breath, gasping on the asphalt. For both of them, time ceased to exist. Gone were the books, the hunting trips, and the children who would never be. The wedding dishes still packed, lay at home in boxes, as if they somehow knew destiny had no business eating breakfast. They had waited a lifetime for each other, and now West had failed to yield the right of way, ignoring the only glaring sign on that Sunday afternoon, trading his belief in the party dress for the politics of the open road dangling behind a lethal wheel. And when it came to pass, it certainly wasn't the crash of the 30s that killed them, but a Pontiac sedan driven by a fruit tramp whose hand West would have gladly shaken on any given night. For what ultimate purpose was the locus of fate formed, if not to crack the clock that bled drop by drop out along the lonely boulevard? Had the gods bothered to look down that cool winter day, they might have seen a million teeming dreams rising up to meet them. This next poem is the title from the book that precedes Whistling to Trick the Wind. That book is The Geographer's Wife. The sections of Geographer's Wife are east, west, north, and south, as if all of us are following a certain geographical path that we look to. The Geographer's Wife. Pity the poor geographer's wife, who spends most of her life missing him in every isthmus, desert, mountain, and valley he's had the pleasure to explore. He claims it's not his fault. The field takes him away, draws him east, west, north, and south at a moment's notice, often in the middle of the night, while she rises from their tiny bed and he packs a bag of silence only a secret can keep. He swears she knew about his desire, the longing to touch air, land, and sea, this need to leave a piece of himself wherever he can, Survey the climatic conditions of an earth so vast you can barely comprehend it all. When she timidly asks upon each one of his returns how it is they cannot travel together, why he will not share his life's work, he struggles so with his words. She retreats to the ball of yarn. Steady yourself for a week they have before his next departure. Ah, yes. Pity the poor geographer's wife who watches the house grow more and more around her each day. One more from the geographer's wife before we get to Whistling to Trick the Wind. This is a poem called Girls Like Linka. And when I taught at Glendale College, I had a student whose name was Linka. There was something about her in a mysterious, dark way that certainly mesmerized me. Girls like Linka. Girls like Linka pin their hair to the wind, 10 strands at a time, when the first sign of trouble threatens to overtake them. Girls like Linka dream of nothing but boys who know how to cruise up and down the cruel avenues that litter their lives. Girls like Linka behave badly at parties their mothers make them attend, if only to raise suspicion, so they will not be invited again. Girls like Linka turn away from their fathers at that time of month, wishing the moon was a stranger with a spare cigarette. Girls like Linka love no one but themselves, always dressed in black, each day a service, every night a funeral. Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank Meadowlark Press for putting out the most recent book. They are in the Midwest. They're in Kansas. We like to say they are small, but they are mighty. This is the opening poem from Whistling to Trick the Wind. It's called The Woodpecker. To know the length of my shadow grows smaller and smaller each year, makes me pause in mid-thought, unable to complete the sentence it seems I need to serve. I realize no escape is possible. Fate has a way of convincing even the most ardent skeptic we can only go so far before the last chip is cashed and we're no longer playing with the benefit of house money. Each night as sleep approaches, if I'm lucky enough to find it, I ask myself what I've done to earn admission into heaven. That I often come up empty gives me ample cause for sorrow. And I think the time appears short. I must learn to do better should I expect a reprieve. When the morning mercifully arrives, I hear my friend, the woodpecker, drilling patiently outside the window. Is his work any different than mine? The next poem is titled Revelation. I think in some way, shape, or form, each of us is always looking for some revelation to help us explain what it is we're doing here. There's a wonderful publicist at Meadowlark, my friend Lindsay Garcia. This is her favorite poem, so I'm going to read this for her. Revelation. When my father revealed he once murdered a man in Canada at the age of 19, it failed to surprise me. He never told me the exact details, and I never asked. knowing the admission was more than enough. He was 92 and ready to call it a life. The few times I saw him before the end finally came, he referred to it as the incident, and he seemed to feel perhaps my total lack of reaction gave him permission to mention it again, as if this were his dying request. The last day I visited him, I gathered up the courage to question whether my mother knew about the so-called incident at any time before she passed away. But he simply muttered, "Never," paused for a moment, and then said matter-of-factly, "I'd rather kill myself than admit such a thing to her." After my father's death, for the first time since I was a small boy, I began to wish I were not an only child, remembering how lonely I felt on certain weekday afternoons in the white heat of summer when the weight of tomorrow had not yet arrived at my front door. I'd like to thank the Chautauqua Literary Review for publishing this wonderful review in that same journal by Charlotte Matthews of this poem, Coastal Lagoon. I am unsure of lust, residing in curious places where I would never suspect. The eye of a tree, the belly of a rock, the toe of a cloud. I do not presume to know how to find desire around that jolly corner, over the next bluff, under the back steps. I become somewhat flustered all too often, I'm afraid, when I pretend passion thinks on its feet, sings for its supper, dreams of its demise. But I have, most recently, witnessed the afterglow love casts across the floor on a candlelit night in a circular room beside a coastal lagoon. I have 3 more to go. Harry, I hope that's okay.
It's fine.
Great. I believe someone was reading about 25 minutes ago and read a pantoum. I'm going to read a villanelle. It is a villanelle that in its own way is dedicated to Dylan Thomas, because I think he wrote, yes, go gentle into that good night. Dylan Thomas wrote this, I believe, either about his father or a father figure who he was telling, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying light. I always wanted to write something kind of on that note. And after my mother died, I wrote this poem. It was published in the Bryant Literary Review. But my poem is a little bit different. It is called Go Gentle into That Good Night. Please, please go gentle into that good night. Old age should never burn at close of day, and do not rage against the dying light. Wise women at their end know death is right, because their words leave little left to say. Please, please go gentle into that good night. Good women watch each wave and see how bright their deeds have danced across the silver bay, and do not rage against the dying light. Wild women catch and sing the sun in flight. They learn to let grief hurry on its way. Please, please go gentle into that good night. Brave women near the last adjust their sight through eyes that search to find a final ray. They do not rage against the dying light. And you, my mother, climb the lofty height. Bless every step you calmly take, I pray. Please, please go gentle into that good night and do not rage against the dying light. Lucky enough today to read a poem for my mother. So I would like to read one for my wife. This is called How I Came to You. Bankrupt, petty, poor, without a drop of honey coursing through my veins, the ire from another life I led in slow motion. When my soul departed, the moment I turned away to scowl at the stars. Aimless, shiftless, stuck in nothing except the mire I could not escape, but grew to embrace. Because once you wear the cloak of loneliness day in and day out, you don't know how else to dress. Admit, permit, submit. Vows I refused to keep until I came to you and heard you reveal them for the first time. This gift, a blessing to free me from myself. And the last poem I'm going to read is the title poem, From Whistling to Trick the Wind. This poem is what David Garian in the European journal Interlicu called the titular poem in the collection. And I think in our own private ways, we were all somewhat whistling to trick the wind so that we find our own peace and serenity in life. Whistling to trick the wind. Ran out of words one letter at a time, found no use for them, spoke in speechless sounds only the deaf can hear. Lost his job, refused to repeat destinations. The train passed as it wound its way from the mouth of Manhattan through the belly of Brooklyn. Gave his friends the heave-ho when they requested an intervention, paid the neighbors for their services, climbed up the roof in the dark and communed with the moon. Came to believe in a God whose perfection was never in question. Promised to wire his mouth shut if the Almighty would agree to keep his miracles to himself. Lived a rather fruitful life in the company of boulders, too old and tired to converse. Took his final act of contrition, whistling to trick the wind. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart, for the marvelous reading. There's such a complexity and duality within you. You have a strikingly sense of the tragic and sorrow in your poem, The Day of the Locust, as well as the tenderness and lovingness of the poem to your wife and to your mom. And I also like how your poetry is personal, and yet you're very empathetic toward the other, and you're so aware. So that's very rare in a poet, and I'm grateful to you for the poems you've shared. As I did with Laure-Anne, I would like to ask you a couple of questions. When did you write your first poem?
Certainly not at the age of 9. I don't think I did probably until, it's funny. I think it was in 9th or 10th grade. The only creative writing class I took was a high school class. And even though I taught creative writing, I never took one. I was writing song lyrics for the most part when I was in high school and in college. And that kind of got me a little bit more, believe it or not, into writing poetry.
And what is it about the poetry form that attracts you to it?
Looks, Harry, on the page and the open space, the ability for the reader to kind of crawl into that poem with interpretations galore, the multiplicity of meanings from not only the poem itself, but from individual words, the compression, everything that's there that to me makes poetry poetry.
And if I may interrupt, there's a lot of cadence in you. I mean, one hears that music is very close to your heart because there's a cadence in your poems, and sometimes it's iambic and then it's trochaic and it's not lulling because it's not always the same, but it is very musical and you pay attention to sounds without hammering them into the poem. So
when you're writing a poem, Bart, or when you begin, what do you focus on? Do you have an idea? Is it emotion, words, image? What is it that you focus on when you first begin to write a poem?
Yeah, that's very, very difficult to answer because I'm not quite sure. There are all these different aspects to it. And very often when I start writing a poem, I have no idea where that poem is going.
Here.
I don't sit down and say, okay, I need to write about this. Very often I think it was William Stafford, I think he talked about, or James Meredith, about opening the window up. And so very often I don't have anything in mind. I will put myself in a space for a couple of hours and just allow, I'm sure there's ideas in there that have been percolating for a long, long time, but I'm not sure exactly where they come from. I know that once I do get something down, it's a tremendous amount of work in terms of revision and revision and revision and just going through. So, the genesis of it all is just as much mysterious to me as it is to you, as it might be to Laurie as well.
Let me ask each one of you a question. What would you say to a young woman who's just beginning to write poetry and she's sitting down to write a poem? What would you tell her to focus on if it's not too difficult? But what advice would you give? Maybe that's what advice would you give to a young woman who's just beginning poetry? And start with Bart and then Laure-Anne.
Just give yourself the time, the space, the patience to write, and realize that writing is a process, that writing takes a long time if you're serious about it. But just the same as I say serious, be as gentle with what you write and don't put yourself in a box. I would say one thing about time. There's something about being able to put yourself in a quiet space and allow that window to be open and just see, feel, touch, whatever it is that's going to hopefully come through. And if it doesn't come through today, there's all this talk about writer's block. And I think there's writer's block, but it's all psychological. And it's usually people don't even get to the page or the computer. Something blocks them. And
go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Finish.
Oh, no. It's just that happens. I don't know many people who you say, okay, for a week or two, just humor me. I want you to do this. I want you to sit down for an hour or 90 minutes in a quiet space with paper, with your computer. You know, don't go ordering a pizza. Don't go calling your friend. Just give yourself that space. I don't know many people who will not come up with an idea that they can work on.
Well, I always say, take the time to take the time. And here's Laure-Anne. What advice would you give to a young woman writing?
After saying exactly what Bart said, I would add, and because that's a discipline that I impose on myself, I read twice as long as the writing time. I read. The more you read, the better you write. It's so true. It's so damn true. And if you can read a whole book and then sit down and try to talk to that poet, try to answer those poems, try to create a dialogue between you and the book you just read, you know. And sometimes I even dare say, "Dear Larry Levis." And then I write a poem because I just read a whole book by him, right? And it helps me because then I'm less alone. And you know, Bart, you and I have in common that we're only children, that we don't have brothers and sisters. So we always need to find out there someone who will listen.
You know, my wife, Holly Prado, was the only child. And I'm the youngest of five. I used to tell her, you got everything you wanted.
Yeah.
But that's another story.
He was a wonderful poet.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Is a wonderful poet.
Well, you two are wonderful poets, and this has been an enrapturing poetry hour, and you've really uplifted all of us. And here's our wonderful director, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you both for being with us and for sharing. One of the things we talk about often is the art of the language, but there's also a trust in the vulnerability that gets expressed in this hour. And I just want to acknowledge that and appreciate you guys for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Bart.
Thank you, Laurie. I will be in touch with you, Laurie.
Okay. Thank you, Harry.
You guys, you have some writing that you're off to do now, right? Is that correct?
Oh, yes. I have a canary in mind.
Very good.
Thanks again, Harry.
Thank you. Harry, before you go, tell us what's up for next week.
Next week, we're having a reading from Robert Peters, who is one of the top poet critics on the West Coast. And he wrote a book called The Gift to Be Simple, which is about Ann Lee, the mother founder of the Shakers. And we have four wonderful actors here, Corinne Conley, Helen Richmond, Kay Wiseman, and Tony Sawyer, who are going to read that book. It should be a wonderful afternoon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was a great hour. We'll see you next week.